Hey everyone, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating discourse from Dr. Jude Adege over at the St. Jude Fertility Institute. We're going to trace the history of subfertility. It's this wild journey that reveals so much about human nature, sheer desperation, and this deep, relentless drive we have to build families. We'll be looking at how humanity has tackled the challenge of infertility across centuries, literally going from mystical rituals all the way to the incredible clinical breakthroughs of the modern era.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the timeless agony of infertility, then move on to explore the magical cures and strange potions of the past. After that, we'll look at the deities and symbols humans worshipped, and finally, we'll wrap up with the modern scientific breakthroughs that changed absolutely everything.
Right, part 1, the timeless agony of infertility. Look, to really grasp the extreme lengths our ancestors went to, we've got to start by grounding ourselves in the deep emotional core of this journey. We have to understand that universal, agonizing pain of wanting a child and just not being able to have one.
Give me children or else I die. That's a really powerful quote from Genesis, where Rachel is desperately pleading with Jacob. It shows us that ancient texts already grasped the intense distress of subfertility. And what's super interesting here is that these early records also show an understanding that some causes of infertility are familial or inheritable. We even see historical illustrations of early surrogacy in the story of Abraham and Hagar. This intense desire, it's deeply woven into the absolute oldest stories of our civilization.
Think about the literal panic attack level of stress that comes with this. The deep distress of subfertility is a timeless, universal experience. This isn't just some modern psychological concept we recently gave a name to. It's an enduring human condition. Dr. Adege's research really drives home that the stress and distress of infertility know literally no historical bounds. It pushes people to their absolute emotional limits.
And historically, we see the heavy psychological toll of all that stress. We're talking about profound depression, a really crushing feeling of worthlessness, and severe marital disharmony. But honestly, perhaps the most tragic historical constant is the social stigma, a stigma that was almost exclusively and totally unfairly borne by the woman. When you wrap your head around that kind of intense emotional and social pressure, the historical treatments we're about to dive into, well, they suddenly start to make a whole lot of sense.
Which brings us to part 2, magical cures and strange potions. Let's see how that universal pain led to some truly desperate and frankly bizarre historical attempts to cure the agony. Because before modern medicine, people essentially had to rely on hope, magic, and whatever the local healer happened to suggest.
Driven by that intense stress we just talked about, people would try almost anything, and I mean literally anything. Historical treatments actually included consuming pig's teeth, frogs, and even spiders. Can you imagine the sheer desperation it takes to try that? Others leaned a bit more toward the mystical, relying on good luck charms or surrounding themselves with specific flowers that were thought to attract fertility, things like roses, the lotus, and the orchid.
And that brings us to the famous mandrake root, a really powerful Solanaceae plant. Rachel actually sought this out in the biblical texts. By the Middle Ages, the mandrake had become Europe's ultimate magical cure-all. People genuinely believed it could treat infertility, cure insomnia, foretell the future, and even protect soldiers in battle. No kidding. Because the root sometimes naturally looks like a little human figure, it totally captured the human imagination as this profound source of life-giving magic.
Just to show you how culturally huge this plant was, check out this quote from Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra. "Give me to drink mandragora, that I might sleep out this great gap of time. My Antony is away." Cleopatra is literally asking for this potion so she can sleep through the pain of Antony's absence. It perfectly highlights its legendary status in the ancient world. It wasn't just a fertility treatment. It was a powerful, almost mythical narcotic and cure-all that was deeply embedded in their literature and daily life.
Okay, moving into part 3, deities and fertility symbols. Because, well, when potions and plants failed, ancient peoples naturally looked to the divine. Seeking higher powers, humans turned to the gods and to massive sacred monuments.
It's incredible how diverse ancient cultures sought help from very specific fertility goddesses to cure their distress. In ancient Egypt, you had Isis and Hathor, who protected women in labor. In Greece, it was Aphrodite. In Rome, Venus. And across the African continent, powerful deities like Oshun, Yamoja, and Mamiwata were deeply revered. These weren't just abstract ideas to them, right? These were vital lifelines. People performed elaborate rituals and offered prayers, desperately hoping these powerful figures would finally grant them the gift of a child.
But alongside prayer, people also visited sacred places and giant fertility symbols. And honestly, They don't get much more giant than the Cerne Abyss giant. This is a massive, 55-meter high-standing nude male figure carved right out of the chalk bedrock on a hillside in Dorset, England. For centuries, it has stood there as a monumental fertility symbol woven directly into the landscape. To give you an idea of the scale we're talking about, the figure features a very prominent 21-foot erection. It explicitly highlights its purpose to ancient peoples as a literal beacon of male fertility and reproductive power, carved permanently into the earth itself. And here is where history gets, well, incredibly practical. Desperate couples wouldn't just go look at this giant, they would actively use it. Dr. Adage notes that historical treatments actually included taking a midnight romp right on top of this massive fertility symbol. The idea was that the magic and the raw power of the sacred site would somehow transfer to them and finally cure their infertility.
And around the world, we see other profound fertility symbols reflecting this exact same human need. Take the Hindu Shiva Lingam, a sacred symbol of divine generative energy in India. And the list goes on globally, right? From the cow in Indian and Iranian cultures, to the snake, the rabbit, and the Native American fertility deity Kokopelli. Everywhere you look throughout human history, we have created symbols to attract the one thing we wanted most.
Finally, we reach part 4, the modern scientific breakthrough. This is where we transition from centuries of guesswork, magic roots, and midnight romps to the clinical climax of our story. This is the moment humanity finally cracked the code.
For thousands of years, we were stuck in those early eras, relying on prayers, mandrake roots, and giant chalk symbols. Then, in the absolute blink of an eye, historically speaking, we arrive at Tuesday, July 25, 1978. On that exact day, Patrick Steptoe and Robert Edwards completely revolutionized medicine with the birth of Louise Brown, the very first IVF baby. Our modern approach, an approach based finally on clinical investigation and targeted medical treatment, was officially born.
Which brings us to today. And I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. We look back at eating spiders and midnight romps as ancient history, sure. But as our science continues to accelerate at this crazy pace, how will future generations view our current IVF treatments? The methods change, absolutely, but that timeless human desire for family, it remains exactly the same. I really hope this explainer has given you a fascinating new perspective on the history of subfertility. Until next time, keep exploring the incredible stories hidden in our history.